Hey, welcome back to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis. I had the idea for this episode when I did my REM episode, which you can reach by clicking above. In that episode, I talked about the band's cover of Crazy by Pylon, Superman by obscure 60s band The Click, and Strange by my beloved Wire. And I started thinking that a cover song episode could be fun. I always feel the best cover of a song retains the specialness of the original while tailoring the song to the talents of the performer. Every song I'm bringing you today is a great cover version, and I think I'm giving you a pretty good cross-section. You're getting some better-known and lesser-known covers. So please join me for a cadre of kick-ass covers. Before we get rolling, I just want to say thank you to my newest patron, Patrick. I appreciate the support, and from one writer to another, thank you. If you would like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon. It's at patreon.com/popculturegraveyard. And thank you. Up first, Hanging on the Telephone by Blondie, 1978. This track is one of my favorites on the LP Parallel Lines, but I've been a big fan of the original by The Nerves for years. The Nerves version came out in 1976. Originally on a 7-inch with 3 other Nerves songs. Hanging on the Telephone originals go for a couple of $100s now. But this wonderful Pennyman Records release that I got about 20 years ago is really all I need. And when I would DJ, I would spin the Nerves version all the time. It was sort of what I called a smoke signal song, which would send a message to everyone in the venue about the kind of music I spin. The funny thing is so many people would come up to me asking who was doing the cover of the Blondie song, and they were shocked to discover that the Blondie version was the cover song. Anyway, Blondie's cover version is brilliant, maintaining the electric energy of the original while infusing it with enough production gloss to send it rocketing up the charts. Although Blondie's version had about as much luck on the US charts as the Nerves version, the song did very well overseas, and even was a top 5 single in Britain. The Blondie version is aided by Mike Chapman's brilliant production. Mike Chapman and Nicky Chin were the brilliant songwriters behind bands like The Sweet and Suzi Quatro, but he is a fantastic producer all on his own, and he's one of the many ingredients that makes this song sizzle. My favorite touch that Mike Chapman did on this song, aside from the telephone noise intro, Chapman added a touch that really increased the urgency of the ending of the song. That whole whoa, 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 that is not on the Nerves original, and that's his voice that you hear paired with Debbie's. I love both versions, and I would hate to have to pick between them. The Nerves had 3 great songwriters, Jack Lee, Peter Case, and Paul Collins. All 3 of them went solo after the Nerves. Paul Collins with the Beat, which brought you Rock and Roll Girl. Peter Case formed the Plimsouls, which brought you A Million Miles Away. And Jack Lee continued his solo career, although he was never able to capitalize on his monster-sized talent. Anyway, Jack Lee is such a brilliant songwriter that there are actually 2 Jack Lee songs on Parallel Lines. The first, of course, is Hanging on the Telephone. The second is Will Anything Happen?, which is another favorite off this brilliant LP. You don't need me to tell you that Parallel Lines is one of the greatest albums of the 70s. So all I'll leave you with is please check out The Nerves. Up next, The Passenger, Susie and the Banshees, 1987. Originally done by Iggy Pop on his Lust for Life album, 1977. Iggy Pop wrote the fantastic lyrics to The Passenger, and the great guitarist Ricky Gardner wrote all the music. 10 years after the original version, Steve Severin gets to play one of the greatest bass riffs of all time. And he pretty much carries the song, with Budgie's masterful drumming creating a wall for Steve to play ball up against. And Susie's vocal performance unlocks all the sexiness of the song without any of the dread or world weariness in Iggy's version. The Passenger is just one of many great covers on their Through the Looking Glass LP. In addition to The Passenger, they have Little Johnny Jewel by Television, This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us by Sparks, and even things you wouldn't expect, like The Doors' Your Lost Little Girl, or the band's This Wheel's on Fire. On paper, they shouldn't work, but they are exceptional covers. But my favorite Susie cover is always going to be The Passenger. Up next, Show Me the Way, Dinosaur Jr., 1987. Peter Frampton's original version came out in 1975. Dinosaur Jr. would do a fantastic version of The Cure's Just Like Heaven 2 years after this. When I would bring this with me to DJ, I would usually spin In a Jar, but if the mood hit me right and it was late enough, I would put on Show Me the Way. For me, the cover is fascinating. It shouldn't work, but it does. And I think it basically works because it's one guitar god covering another. It's too bad in a way that Peter Frampton was so pretty, because looking back, I think people have the wrong idea about why he was famous. He was a killer guitar player. He still is. But I think for youngsters today, his legacy mostly focuses on his heartthrob status, and that Frampton Comes Alive cover shot does not help. Anyway, the most fascinating thing about this cover version, I still cannot tell if J Mascis is being serious or not with this cover. The song walks an interesting line between faithful rendering and taking the piss. I think J Mascis has his heart in the right place, because you cannot do this good a job on a cover unless you love it. This is a great cover because the band play it straight, and it's got Dinosaur Jr.'s identifiable signature sound, that ear-bleeding country that you signed up for. And I'm sure Frampton would approve of the solo he plays on this. Just a gorgeous, murky guitar tone. Up next, Mr. Grieves, TV on the Radio, 2003. The original is, of course, by the Pixies off of Doolittle, which came out in 1989. If you're not familiar with TV on the Radio's first EP, it's a killer. You can tell by the ringwear and edgeware that I used to drag this everywhere with me. It's got 5 fantastic songs on it, and Mr. Grieves is just the perfect way to put this EP to bed. I fell in love with TV on the Radio when this EP came out. It was around the same time as Yeah Yeah Yeahs and The Liars, and a whole lot of great bands were coming out of Brooklyn. Anyway, when TV on the Radio came out, their sound, to me, was almost like Peter Gabriel fronting Suicide, with Ian MacKaye on guitar, if that makes sense. I was a Pixies fan from jump, so the first time I heard this EP, when I got to the last song, I lost my mind. I was like, oh my god, they're doing Mr. Grieves, but they're not doing a straight up cover. This song is more laid back and stripped down. You will find yourself snapping your fingers to Mr. Grieves. There's something sweet and mournful about the song at the same time, the way they do it. And the vocals sort of take you to church. They turned Mr. Grieves into a spiritual. The original is fairly stripped down, but then when the band step on the gas, they really bring up the intensity. TV on the Radio doesn't do that, and yet somehow it feels just as substantial. 2 devastating versions of the same song. And I really think if you love great vocals, you will enjoy TV on the Radio's version. Up next, Victoria by The Fall, 1988. The original by The Kinks, 1969. The Fall and The Kinks, 2 great tastes that taste great together. You know, The Fall are very much seen as one thing. Fairly abrasive, repetitious music over the sardonic, sniping, clipped delivery of their spokesman / shaman, Marquis Smith. I don't think they get enough credit for being such a good band, which they were. And this track really unlocks the musicality in the band. This is my favorite era of The Fall, when Brix was in the band. Brix was a great guitarist and vocalist who was also Marquis Smith's wife at the time. She brought very underrated elements to the sound of the band. Upbeatness, sweetness, and hooks, which for a very short time brought great balance to Mark's usual darkness, strangeness, and vitriol. It was a magical time in the band, and the albums they made with Brix are some of my favorites by the band. By the way, if you've only dabbled in the Kinks and only know a few songs by them, I think you're really missing out. They went on a run of albums through the 60s that was unparalleled for quality, and Arthur, or The Decline and Fall of the British Empire, is one of them. In addition to Victoria, it's got a number of great songs on it, but it also houses perhaps my favorite Kinks song ever, Shangri-La. But I digress. One thing you may be shocked at is just how faithful a cover it is. The Fall bring their usual aggression and repetition to the table, only it's beautifully tamed within the structure of the Kinks' masterpiece. And while they don't do away with the bridge of the song entirely, the part that goes Land of Hope and Gloria, the band turned it into a super short instrumental instead. So basically, The Fall just keep rocking through the whole song. And I'm a big fan of the video that The Fall made for Victoria. It's charming as hell, and it shows you just how much fun the band were having at that time in their career. I'll put a link to it below. Up next, I Love Rock and Roll, Joan Jett, 1981. I've always loved that Mick Rock cover pick. Isn't that beautiful? The original version of the song was done by the Arrows. Joan is no stranger to covers. She does a beautiful version of Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells. She did a great cover version of Do You Want to Touch Me by Gary Glitter. But this is her one cover version that I don't think a lot of Americans realize is a cover. When the Arrows did the song, it was produced by Mickey Most for his Rack Records. Believe it or not, it was originally a B-side for the Arrows single Broken Down Heart. The obvious hit potential of I Love Rock and Roll, though, caused the record company to flip the sides for all subsequent repressings. And the Arrows rode the song to success on television, where the band later had their own British TV series, titled simply Arrows. Joan's version, though, is far superior to the original, thanks in no small part to the great production by Richie Cordell and Kenny Laguna. The original is a bit clean and rounded around the corners. Joan's version has a little Runaways dirt under its fingernails, and I think it's one of the greatest cover songs of all time. For Joan, the song and the accompanying video rocketed her up the charts. This is another great video, by the way, if you haven't seen it. Her and her band at the time. Super, super 80s. Up next, Indian Giver by the Ramones, 1987. This was a B-side to their single Real Cool Time, and it can be found on this comp, Ramones Mania. The original was by the 1910 Fruit Gum Company that came out in 1969. You can judge an album by its cover occasionally. They were a pretend band made up by brilliant songwriters. This came out of the Kasanitz and Katz house of songwriting, and it featured Richie Cordell, who would later go on to produce the Joan Jett album I just talked about. There's a part of the Ramones that I feel gets lost today. A lot of people focus on the aggressiveness of the Ramones. I don't think enough people pay attention to their bubblegum sensibility. The Ramones wrote sweet lyrics a lot, and they loved bubblegum songs, with lyrics like Indian Giver, you took your love away from me. That's like a blueprint for Ramones lyrics writing. Now, in today's PC landscape, even the term Indian Giver is probably verboten, let alone artwork like this. I just realized I'm filming this on Indigenous Peoples Day. We might edit this. The Ramones version has all of the ear-cloying infectiousness of the original, but what truly elevates the Ramones version is Joey's vocal. He had such a beautiful voice, perfect for this kind of song. Joey always excelled in songs where he didn't get the girl, or when the girl mistreated him, or when the girl left him or done him wrong. Sadly, a lot of that came from life experience, but he always managed to make that kind of heartbreaking song hit home. It is a great cover version. And I'll tell you something else. I will put most Ramones B-sides up against other bands' A-sides. Up next, Into the Groovy, Sonic Youth, 1986. Originally done by Madonna in 1985 for the movie Desperately Seeking Susan. This is on a split single with Angel, another great song, but Into the Groove is next level great from Madonna. This may be the only time on the internet you find a guy in a Richard Hell shirt saying nice things about Madonna. But if you grew up in New York in the 1980s, you liked Madonna. She was one of us. Some of the songs I'm talking about are years apart, sometimes a decade apart from the original. Sonic Youth covered this song the very next year. And Sonic Youth are no stranger to covers. They also covered the song Superstar, which was recorded by dozens of artists in the 70s, most famously by the Carpenters. And whereas I find that cover abrasive and weird, I find this one sexy and infectious. And Thurston Moore, believe it or not, does a great job on the vocals. And listen, this band is not being snarky. They liked Madonna too. And the B-side to Into the Groovy is Burnin' Up, another Madonna song. And guess who's on that? Mike Watts sings it and plays guitar and bass, and Greg Ginn from Black Flag plays guitar on it. This was made in England, by the way, on Blast First through a new alliance, and it is a bitchin' 12-inch. If you haven't heard this version yet, you're in for a treat. I predict 35 to 40% of you will really enjoy this. Up next, The Harder They Come, Joe Jackson Band, 1980. The original, of course, by Jimmy Cliff, off the soundtrack to the film The Harder They Come in 1972. This song has been covered a number of times. Madness did it, Joe Strummer did it, Wayne Kramer, Rancid, Keith friggin' Richards. But my favorite cover is by Joe Jackson, and it may be the least known version. The main reason the song is great is Joe's voice. It is one of my favorite voices out of the New Wave movement. The second reason I love it is Graham Mabey's bass. Graham, pictured here closest to me, is a phenomenal bass player. He's worked with Joe Jackson for like 45 years now. And when you hear his bass playing, you'll understand why Joe won't let go of him. He plays with punk attitude and a funk sensibility. Jimmy Cliff's original is brilliant, and it has a lovely lilting quality. But Joe Jackson's version is gritty and raw, and I love it. Up next, Mickey by Tony Basil, 1982. The original version was titled Kitty by the band Racy in 1979. Racy was yet another band, championed by Nicky Chinn and Mike Chapman. Chapman and Chinn wrote other songs for the group, like Lay Your Love on Me and Some Girls, but Kitty is next level great, as is its American version, Mickey. The song was released as a single, but is included on our compilation Word of Mouth. Mickey is one of several covers on this album by such disparate artists as Burt Bacharach, David Essex, and Devo. But Mickey was a #1 hit for Tony. It was yet another case of the perfect song being paired with the perfect video, just rocketing the song to #1. Mickey actually rocks a lot harder than the original. The sound is bigger and crunchier, and the production is spot on. Even the lyrics are more badass. Racy's version, So Come On and Give It To Me Any Way You Can, Anytime You Want to Do It, I'll Take It Like a Man, pales in comparison to Tony's So Come On and Give It To Me Any Way You Can, Any Way You Want to Do It, I'll Take It Like a Man. That little turn of phrase between any time you want to do it and any way you want to do it makes a world of difference. And the line, I'll take it like a man, is so much more badass coming from a female voice than from a male voice. Another lyric change from Racy's version. Now when you take me by the nose, how am I gonna know if every time you put your little limb on show? Tony's version. Now when you take me by the, who's ever gonna know? Every time you move, I let a little more show. As a kid, when I'd hear that song, I thought they were bleeping her. Now when you take me by the whoo, I was like, oh my God, she can't even say it. I know what she's talking about. I didn't know what she was talking about. It sounded dangerous to my young ears. Mickey was a well-deserved #1 for Tony, and it really amplifies everything that's great about the original and takes it to a whole new level. And finally, Ball of Confusion, That's What the World Is Today. Love and Rockets, 1986. The original was by The Temptations in 1970, and it was written by the Motown hitmakers Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong, just two of many songwriting geniuses that Motown employed. They were also masterful producers, and they created an all-time classic here. This is yet another case where you just don't see how this band is going to cover a band so far out of their genre, yet they hit it out of the park. Express is my favorite album by Love and Rockets. It houses my favorite Love and Rockets song, It Could Be Sunshine, and this whole album is tinged with a psychedelic quality that I feel bleeds into their cover of Ball of Confusion beautifully. It was exactly the right time for them to cover this song. Like every other song on this album, it's got big production. You can't cover Ball of Confusion without a good bass player. David J. is a great bass player. Prior to this cover, Ball of Confusion seemed sort of locked into the time at which it was recorded. This cover really freed the song from its era and gave it new life. Even parts that seemed like they wouldn't work, like when they go rap on, brother, rap on. Whereas in the original, it's authentic and righteous. Here it comes across as playful and charming, which works. So if you haven't heard Love and Rockets' Ball of Confusion, get on that. I hope you enjoyed this cool cadre of kick-ass cover songs. Alliteration. If you did, please do me a favor and click the like button, and be sure to subscribe. And I will see you next week with a lot more cool stuff.